first-of-its-kind move, one that takes Israel a little closer to normalization with the Arab world. But the UAE ambassador to Washington, Youssef Al-Taiba, did this to warn the Israeli public against the intention to annex parts of the West Bank. Such a move, he said, would be devastating to the relations between Israel and the Arab world.
We wanted to speak directly to the Israelis. The message was, all the progress that you've seen and the attitudes that have been changing towards Israel, people becoming more accepting of Israel and less hostile to Israel, all of that could be undermined by a decision to annex.
After 2 planes of the UAE's official airlines landed in Israel in just a few weeks, this clarification may be needed. A reminder that while full normalization with Gulf countries is in reach, it's still not there. The claim date for the Israeli annexation is July 1st. As it gets closer, more parties are joining the chorus against this controversial step. American was the first to warn that if Israel follows through, he will consider all diplomatic options. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas last week visited Israel and Jordan and warned that Israel could face sanctions from European countries if the annexation goes ahead. And now Al-Taiba is saying out loud that the UAE is no different. While his country generally supports the peace plan unveiled by U.S. President Donald Trump, unilateral steps are to be avoided.
This land is disputed land. This is supposed to be part of a negotiation. This is supposed to be part of a two-state solution. And by moving unilaterally, you're basically saying, I don't believe in the negotiation or the two-state solution, or I'm doing something to undermine it.
Israel has tried to get closer to Gulf countries for years. Risking the fragile and improving relationship with them is one more consideration Jerusalem will have to take into account when it decides if it's going.
North Korea is threatening to send troops to demilitarized zones along the border with South Korea as tensions rise between the two countries. And this is coming, of course, just a day after Pyongyang blew up a liaison office, often used for official meetings between both of those countries. Remy Inocencio has the latest.
That de facto embassy was officially known as the Inter-Korean Liaison Office, was only established back in 2018 and stood just north of that heavily militarized border across from South Korea in a city known as Kaesong. But now it just doesn't exist. North Korean state media released these images of the demolition in an Inter-Korean
Hostile to Israel.
These images of the demolition in a now you see it standing, now you don't kind of event. And that's not the end of it. Pyongyang has threatened to do even more, to redeploy its military troops to border areas that were demilitarized earlier. That includes rebuilding guard posts and restarting military exercises near the border. All of this would reverse agreements from 2018 aimed at lowering tensions. Now, it's interesting and important to note that Kim Yo-jong, that's Kim Jong-un's younger sister, has been taking the lead on this. After her brother disappeared for 3 weeks earlier this year, there were rumblings that she might be his successor. Ultimately, experts see this as Pyongyang's attempt to try to extract concessions from Seoul as well as Washington. Its economy has already been slammed by sanctions and possibly even more so by the coronavirus pandemic.
There is little evidence of what led to Indian and Chinese soldiers engaging in a deadly brawl at their border on Monday. India's army said there were casualties on both sides, but not a shot was fired. These are Indian military reinforcements destined for the border shortly after. India and China share the world's longest unmarked border. In recent months, both sides have upped their military presence, tensions increasing over who owns what land. The border has been disputed since India and China went to war in 1962. The line in yellow is the so-called line of actual control, but there are several disputed areas on either side. One of the main ones is Aksai Chin, which is claimed by India but administered by China. India has appeared confident in a diplomatic resolution. Just on Saturday, India's army chief said this.
The entire situation along our borders with China is under control. We are having a series of talks.
The Chinese also thought dialogue was working, but blame India for the deadly breakdown.
On June 6, border forces of the two countries had commander-level talks and reached a consensus on easing the situation in the border area. However, it was shocking that the Indian forces violated the consensus, crossing the border twice to carry out illegal activities and provoking attacks on Chinese soldiers.
Indian officials have refuted that they caused the escalation. Leh is a quiet town on the Indian side of the border. Outside of military helicopters, residents have few clues behind the tension on their doorstep.
Officials aren't releasing any statement regarding the standoff that is going on at the border, so rumours spread, which has created fear among the people. People living near the border are more scared. The cellular network in the area has also been cut off, and no information is coming through.
The deadly skirmishes raising the stakes for Beijing and New Delhi over where their vast frontiers begin and end.
Second wave in the U.S. and tonight all eyes also on China. Now in what's being called a wartime emergency there, a new cluster, this time in Beijing. It started at a wholesale food market, and here's Ian Pennell tonight on what we know so far.
Tonight, authorities in China are calling it an extremely severe situation as a new cluster of coronavirus cases is identified in Beijing, prompting fears of a second wave. Leaders there are now raising their emergency level as more than 100 new cases have been reported in the past few days, many in the capital. This after a nearly 2-month victory over the virus. Authorities now reimposing restrictions on travellers in and out of Beijing. Residents told to lock down and avoid non-essential travel as schools and universities cancel plans to reopen and businesses are told to work remotely. Like the first outbreak, there are reports that these new cases are linked to an open-air food market. This one in Beijing, now the centre for dozens of new cases, has seen hundreds of thousands of visitors in the past 2 weeks alone. But there are still questions as health experts are saying that this particular strain is similar to the one identified in Europe and not the initial outbreak in Wuhan. The authorities in Beijing are taking this extremely seriously. The last thing anyone in China wants right now is another Wuhan-style outbreak.
Cases in at least 20 states that have eased restrictions. Arizona, Texas, and Florida all reporting their largest one-day increase in new cases. Victor Oquendo is in Miami with more at Victor. There's a cluster breaking out at a recently reopened bar.
That's right. Good morning, Michael. That bar in Jacksonville Beach forced to shut down after recently reopening. These record numbers leading to the mayor of Miami Beach to hit pause on the reopening plan. So bars and clubs, they are still shut, but the governor of Florida is determined to fully reopen the state, saying Florida is not shutting down.
This morning, record-breaking one-day increases.
It's a different population that is making that curve rise, and it's a younger population, but those people have to realize that they have the propensity to spread it to those that are more vulnerable.
Arizona, Florida, and Texas all reporting their largest one-day increases in new COVID cases. This coming as all 3 states increase testing and ease restrictions, allowing more businesses to reopen. They are among 20 states that have seen the number of newly reported cases grow over the last 2 weeks, many sprawling across the South. South Miami Hospital seeing an uptick in patients over the last 10 days, partly due to people not following safety guidelines.
If we each are wearing masks, then we can help reduce the spread of the virus, and we can keep it contained in a way that we can manage to take care of the people sick enough to need to be hospitalized.
Several Jacksonville Beach bars and restaurants shutting their doors again this week because of a small outbreak. More than a dozen people contracting the virus at just one bar.
We've all been stuck indoors for months, being careful, and then the first night we go out, Murphy's Law, I guess.
Arizona seeing a resurgence too. Hospitals there overwhelmed, urgently calling for more ICU nurses.
It's unmistakable that the reopening of my state, of Arizona, back on May 15th really did precipitate that rise, the start to this surge.
These residents wave goodbye to yet another neighbor who's died of COVID-19, a scene that's being repeated at what medical experts call a catastrophic rate. Hector Herrera's 47-year-old brother was infected while at work in a pharmacy. 3 days after taking a COVID-19 test, he was rushed to hospital, but he was sent back home the next day without a diagnosis. 2 days later, he was back, unable to breathe.
He was worried that we could get infected, and he sent us home. The next day, he was dead. We buried him. And it wasn't until the day after that the results of his COVID test came back positive.
Hector and his family blame the government for gross incompetence. They're angry that it refused to implement drastic measures early enough to prevent widespread contagion. The government was reluctant to declare a full lockdown in the capital until a month ago. By then, contagion was totally out of control. And even that has been ineffective. Government subsidies have been insufficient and too slow in arriving. As for respecting the quarantine, we crossed the whole city without being asked for our permits to circulate by soldiers or police.
We're in Puente Alto, the community with the highest rate of contagion in the whole country, and it's supposed to be under lockdown like the rest of the capital. But as you can see, there are people absolutely everywhere, traffic as well. And so now more and more voices are demanding that Santiago be put under hibernation, which is really just a euphemism for a quarantine that actually works.
That means enforcing the quarantine energetically, allowing only essential businesses to keep working, and implementing a robust social aid program to allow the unemployed to stay home, something the president has finally agreed to do. Many accuse the government of refusing to listen to warnings from mayors and the scientific community. As of this week, there's a new health minister who's more open to advice and criticism. But promises of remedying past mistakes is small consolation for thousands of families who are burying their dead.